Hello, everyone. My name's Antonia Lloyd-Jones, and I'm the compiler of this venerable tome that you see before you, the Penguin Book of Polish Short Stories, which we've come together to talk about. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and everyone online for joining us. Thank you. I've been asked just to say something about how this anthology came about. And here we are in the land of storytellers, and here we are with a storybook. I'm going to tell you a story. So many years ago, I organized an event where I got people who should know about these things to talk on a panel about compiling anthologies in translation. And one of the speakers was Susan Harris, who's one of the people who runs Words Without Borders, which some of you may know, which is an online journal of literature in translation. And Susan made a very poignant contribution to my panel. She said, if you ever get it into your head to compile an anthology, the best thing to do is to go and lie down in a darkened room until the feeling passes. Now, I don't know what a psychiatrist would say, but this is my second anthology. And I should have known better, really. But and I keep thinking about, well, there's such and such I've left out. Perhaps I should do another one. But it is a form of madness because it's really quite a difficult thing to do. And the first one took me years and years, and they were both on commission, but the first one I had every excuse and I kept putting it on the back burner. So then when Penguin commissioned me to compile this anthology, I thought, oh my God, well, this is the real deal. How many times in your life do you get asked to compile yet another anthology? And I thought it was a big chance for Polish literature because it isn't very well known. There's not that many people who read Polish and all sorts of other translated literatures. We don't have a lot of opportunities. So I thought, okay, I cannot say no to this. Although there were quite a lot of difficulties in that there were budget limitations, probably the hardest thing. But I was given a great deal of leeway, thankfully. And I was advised that it was a good idea. I had a word limit, which was 180,000 words, including everything. And everything meant an introduction, any kind of notes about the authors, any kind of reading list at the back, etc., etc. And of course, it's quite difficult when you're told you've got 180,000 words and they start off in another language, which usually when you translate from Polish into English, I now know, I'm now an expert, it comes out quite often 1/3 as long. And the mysterious thing about this is that all the people I know who translate English into Polish swear that it comes out 1/3 as long. How that happens, I don't know. Strange, isn't it? Because I thought Polish being inflected would be more concise. However, maybe it's because translators are paid by the word in the target. That's another story. So I was told, okay, you've got this number of words, you've got X amount of money. And as it was quite a tight budget, I took the editor's advice, which was to buy some existing texts in. And I knew that there were various good short stories kind of floating around in journals. For instance, the story that Maciej and Tuesday are going to tell you about. And then they said, and you can use some of the money to commission new translations. And the one Anna has done, for instance, is a newly commissioned translation. And they said, and the rest of it you can do yourself. So I ran out of money about halfway through and had to translate half the book myself. And I would have commissioned more if I could. But that's the way it goes. So, but I looked at some of the existing anthologies in the series, and each editor had been given a pretty free rein. So I could see that there are roughly 40 stories in most of the books. I've got 39 eventually, but I thought I have to set myself one or two rules. The previous anthology I'd done, I'd set myself too many rules and I'd felt very straitjacketed. But this time I thought, okay, it'll be 100 years. And I knew it would come out in 2025. So the oldest story in that book is from 1925. I thought that's quite enough. It was a bit sad because there are authors, older authors. It would have been nice to include, like Bolesław Prus is missing. But I had to draw the line somewhere. And then the other thing I realized was that there's a kind of terrible gap in Polish publishing of books by women in the communist era. I don't know why that is, but I researched and I researched and I researched, and I found lots of short stories, or at least where short stories are concerned. I found lots of short stories by women from before the Second World War, and then since Poland became the Third Republic, but not in between. I don't know why that is, or if maybe my research was lacking in some way, but there seemed to be a gap. So I was trying to keep a good balance of the number of male and female authors in the book. And I've ended up with 1/3 female authors, which sounds a bit pathetic, but actually, I think probably it is a bit of an achievement in this context. I hope people agree who know the literature. Then the other thing I wanted to do was to shoot down the stereotypical thinking about Polish literature, because people always think of Poland, they think of the war, good soldiers, good chaps, Battle of Britain, all that suffering and horror and the Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. And of course, these are very important topics, and there's a great deal of very good literature about the Second World War. But when I was reading for my early research, I just got as many short story collections as I could find on old secondhand stalls in Warsaw and so on, and in secondhand shops. And I had anthologies published in the 70s. And I read one and felt like throwing myself under the number 9 bus, because it was all war and horror and so depressing. And I thought, well, Polish literature isn't just that to me. I mean, some of these things are great and brilliantly written, but I didn't want my book to be just what I call bathing in Granny's blood. So I decided that I would show particularly the humour of Polish literature, because those of you who read Central European literature will know that there's a wonderful kind of rather black humour that crosses the borders of various countries in that part of the world. And it's very brilliant and very telling. And I just thought I want to show that side of it too. So I really was aiming to cover more topics. And that's partly why this book has a very strange group of categories for the stories. I aimed at readers who've never read any Polish literature and don't know any of these authors and won't find very much that's familiar to them. I mean, a lot of people, Polish readers, will know many of the names in this book, but the average English language reader will never have heard of any of them. So I divided the stories into 9 categories, which are slightly silly, but the idea is that you can move around the book and find things that you might like. So it starts with animals, then we've got children, then we've got couples, then I think it's men behaving badly, then it's women behaving badly, then it's misfits, then it's soldiers, surrealists, and survivors. You're in the survivors, you see, because that's where I put the Holocaust stories, on the principle that you can't write about it if you haven't survived it. So I always prefer to talk about survival. And the soldiers are there. And if you want to avoid them, you can avoid them. But if a lot of people like reading, I love reading about childhood. So that's why there's the children category. It's probably time for me to shut up and let somebody else say something. So
Thank you.
I shall pass over to Maciej and Tuesday. Are you next on the agenda? Yes.
Anna.
Oh, it's Anna. I do beg your pardon. It's Anna. It's the thing is, I had to give my copy of the agenda to them. That's my excuse.
Right, so just crack on. Okay, well, I'm Anna Zareko, and I'm going to read from the animal section. And as the other 2 stories are contemporary, I decided I'd read something a little bit older. So this particular story is from the 1970s. It's chronologically Poverty's cat in the white grass. And when we encounter the cat, he is outside, he is exposed, he is homeless, he is cold, he is wet, can people hear me? And he's hungry. He's got his eye on a mouse, so he's observing the mouse, but he is of course also being observed himself, which is important to the story. Anyway, so I'm going to read from the story. Rats feared people. Murder, the cat is called Murder, feared them too, but a little less. To tell the truth, Murder the cat had suffered much at the hands of humans. Children threw stones at him, adults set their dogs on him. But on the other hand, he'd also met much kindness from humans. There were those who gave him sources of milk, tossed him meat or a bone. At the professor's flat, as mentioned before, he led a perfectly comfortable life. Murder preferred, however, to keep out of humans' way. He observed them rather from a distance and tried to guess their intentions in advance, since they were, as a rule, unclear, inconsistent, difficult to predict. Of rats, he remained wary from the time of the youthful escapade. When he had the advantage, he fought and killed them, bit them to death, but did not eat them. They disgusted him. He fled them when they had the upper hand, when he noticed that they were trying to creep up from behind, surround him, cut off his retreat. Murder generally learned to be vigilant in all circumstances, by day and by night, awake or asleep. There was only one place in which Murder felt secure and slept in safety: the home of the university professor. Not counted the snap of the head with the cough which he got after bringing in a mouse, but that was a long time ago. After sleepless spring nights, after hunting, wandering, and brawling, he could curl into a ball on the wardrobe, on a chair, sometimes even on the desk, and sleep like a log, oblivious to conversations, clattering, or singing. Touched occasionally by a hand, or even stroked, he'd raise his head, look at the human, then arrange his head even more comfortably on his own fur and sleep on. But unfortunately, the cedar-scented furniture was no more. Someone else was living in the professor's house. Murder would sometimes raise his head and look at the windows on the second floor, but he saw strangers there, alien faces, other shapes and colours. Murder never stopped believing, not for a moment, that he'd return there someday. Believing, it wasn't faith, it was a deep conviction that the familiar smelling furniture would be moved back into the apartment on the second floor, and that the people who called him Murder and were kind to him would enter once again. Kind meant that they were not mean, nothing more. That was enough for Murder. Anything more would not be to his liking, because Murder did not wish to feel obliged in any way to people. Though, pardon me, one fine day he did bring a mouse in his mouth and taste it, carefully, half alive, on the floor. The offering presented by Murder to the professor's household was not well received, and Murder never repeated it. Okay, so I just want I was going to say a little bit about how I approach translating a story like this, if that's okay. So, the 70s was a time when censorship was still being really rigorously applied, which meant that some people were banned outright. They either had to publish abroad, sometimes in the underground, or worst case scenario, not at all. Conrad Polit was never an overtly political writer. So he was able to publish with official state publishing houses throughout his writing life. But this didn't mean that he escaped suspicion. His work contained elements, even a story like this, that were uncomfortable for the censor. He was considered to be rather pessimistic, not upbeat enough for the People's Republic. He concentrated on the individual rather than on society. He displayed a mistrust of authority. He introduced elements of the absurd. Basically, the censor seemed to be more concerned not with the lines, but what might be lurking between the lines of the story. Well, as a translator, it's bad enough trying to grasp what some of the lines and I start writing about it between them. However, Filipovich is often called a metaphysical realist, which sort of suggests that there's rather a lot going on between the lines. So, I mean, what do you do about that? And this is really a very long-winded way of saying that with a story like this, the most important thing is the tone. What you're looking for is the right tone. So when I'm dismantling the Polish and then reconstructing in English, what I'm aiming to do is to leave enough space between the lines for the metaphysical questions to have freedom of movement. That's really how I approach it. At the same time, not allowing the story to begin to sound allegorical, because it's not an allegory. Filipovich is always writing about a real cat in the real world. So.
No, this is
If he's taking my notes, he's taking my notes. Well, that's very neat because we're moving on to you two.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Maciej Miłkowski. I'm a Polish writer, one included in this great, great volume. I'm gonna read a very short excerpt of one of my stories, the one which is there. I will read in Polish, and I want to apologize for that because I can imagine that for those of you who do not speak any Polish, it may be like 5 minutes of torture. I remember one Persian poet reading in Persian in Krakow. It was about 15 minutes, but it's quite a short one, and then Tuesday is gonna read it in English. It would be much more better in English, much more funny, definitely. Okay, so now I have to switch to Polish. Okay. Oprócz czytania klasyków zajmowałem się też czekaniem. Tym samym zajmował się zresztą cały kraj. Żyło się jakoś nie w pełni, na pół gwizdka. Na coś się czekało, ale w sumie na co? Było jasne, że to wszystko jest jakieś chwilowe i przejściowe, że coś się z tego musi wynurzyć, w coś się to musi przekształcić. Nie wiadomo było, czy wrócą ruskie czołgi, czy raczej zbudujemy drugą Japonię, ale było wiadomo, że wszystko wokół to jest jakaś prowizorka z kartonu, która się tak czy inaczej rychło zawali. Więc się czekało, więc się uchylało od życia w przekonaniu, że życie dopiero nadejdzie. Teraz trzeba jakoś w tym przedsionku z łysym przeczekać, a potem już wpuszczą na salony. I w kwestii życia, makroekonomii, podróży i tatuaży to się okazało w zasadzie prawdą. A literatura? Co z literaturą? Ja wtedy myślałem, że trzeba czytać klasyków i przekopać się jakoś przez tunel okresu przejściowego, przefedrować się przez Ural z Azji do Europy, dotrwać do momentu, gdy będziemy już mieć ładne ubrania, ładne wnętrza i zewnętrza, kiedy to u nas będzie Paryż z krosantami, winem i serem pleśniowym i będzie się siedziało na mansardzie z widokiem na Sekwanę, która w międzyczasie wykluje się z Wisły. Siedziało i tłukło powieści, o tak. A teraz myślę, że to właśnie wtedy były czasy wzorcowo powieściowe. Może i się pisać bez tej mansardy nie dało, ale trzeba było robić notatki. Bo powieść wtedy pukała do drzwi, kołatała do wrót, jak w Macbecie. Sama się człowiekowi pakowała do łóżka. I to wcale nie jedna powieść, ale całe trylogie, tetralogie, cykle powieściowe, całe biblioteki, epoki, gatunki, kamienie milowe, Prusty i Nabokowy. I nie chodzi też o to, że należało pisać o tamtym czasie, że trzeba było opiewać transformację ustrojową, ekonomiczną i kulturalną. Nie chodzi o to, aby pisać o tamtym wirze. Ja właśnie to robię i żadna powieść się z tego nie wyłania. Chodzi o to, że trzeba się było w nim zanurzyć, bo to był czas wyostrzonej rejestracji, jakiejś nadrzeczywistości. Myśleliśmy, że to był czas zawieszenia, a w istocie był to czas wieszania. Ściany były puste, sterczały z nich gołe haki, na których trzeba było mocować jedno płótno za drugim. W innych branżach nie mieli takich złudzeń i zahamowań, dlatego też dzisiaj mamy na przykład samochody albo tatuaże, a nie mamy powieści. Przespaliśmy właściwy moment, czytając klasyków w półwirtualnych biurach podróży. Nie było, ale minęło. Następna taka koniunkcja za 100 lat.
Brawo.
Right. Okay. So my name is Tuesday Bambury. I translated Maciek's short story what, like 15 years ago, I think.
Oh no, 10 maximum, 12 maybe.
And I reread it now, and I was like, that wasn't bad.
You won a
But
competition.
there's so much that I would change. Anyway, I'm just going to start reading, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's the same excerpt that you just heard in Polish. Besides reading the classics, I was also busy waiting. The whole country was busy doing the same thing. It was as if we were living life, it was as if we weren't living life to the full, but with one foot on the brake. We were waiting for something, but for what? It was clear that everything around us was temporary and transitory, that something else was bound to emerge from it, that it had to transform into something else. No one knew if the Ruski tanks would return, or if we'd build a new economic superpower instead. But we knew that everything around us was a cardboard stopgap and would soon fall into pieces, one way or another. And so we were waiting, shirking life, convinced that life was yet to come. For now, I must sit it out in this anteroom with Skin, that's a character, but later I'm sure to be admitted to the ball. And as far as life, macroeconomics, travel, and tattoos were concerned, this turned out to be essentially true. But literature, what about literature? In those days, I believed that we had to read the classics and dig through the tunnel of the transitory phase, bore through the Urals from Asia into Europe, stick it out until the time when we'd have nice clothes and nice interiors and exteriors, when it'd be like Paris over here with croissants, wine, and blue cheese, and we'd be sitting in a garret overlooking the Seine, which would by then have emerged from the vistula. We'd be sitting there churning out novels just like that. But today, I think that those were exceptionally novelistic times. Perhaps it was possible to write without that garret. Perhaps it was impossible to write without that garret, but we should have been taking notes. There was a novel knocking at our door in those days, knocking and banging at the gate like in Macbeth, climbing into our bed of its own accord. And not just one novel either, but entire trilogies, tetralogies and sagas, entire libraries, epochs, genres, milestones, Proust and Nabokov's. And I don't mean that we should have been writing about those times, singing the praises of the political, economic, and cultural transformation. I don't mean that we should have been writing about that turmoil. That's what I'm doing here, and no novel seems to be emerging. The point is that we should have been diving into it, because that was a time of heightened perception, a sort of super reality. We thought it was a time of suspension, but in fact it was a time for suspending. The walls were empty, with naked hooks protruding, and we should have been putting up one picture after another. Other fields weren't obstructed by similar delusions and inhibitions, which is why today we have, for instance, cars or tattoos, but no novels. We missed our moment, reading the classics in semi-virtual travel agencies. It never came, but it went. The planets won't align like that again for another 100 years. Right.
Yeah.
So are you going to tell us how you came to translate this story? How you came to write the story, first of all?
Yeah.
You didn't actually say when the story is set, which is fairly, in this particular case.
Maybe you'd guess.
I hope so.
In the beginning, I was writing two separate stories at the same time. One was about the Holocaust, which is our trademark, as you said. And the other one was about the 90s, the early 90s, which were in Poland a time of expansion, time of beginning, time of when everyone was doing everything for the first time. So, and then I realized that this is exactly the same question, the same story. and it's somehow I somehow made one out of it. Does it still work? I don't know. What struck me is that the Ruski Times came back, so so the history didn't end in the 90s. It was really weird to listen to you reading. So I mean, it is great, of course, but it is extremely weird too. It's like it's a bit like attending your own funeral. I mean, you try to enjoy. You enjoy the flowers, the music, all those people dressed up for the occasion, but somehow you also have the feeling that you're an imposter. You shouldn't be there, even though the party is all about you. Your active presence is no longer needed. So I feel strange, and I feel that whatever is going to happen between this English text of yours and somehow. And between this text and the public, the potential readers, I am no longer needed for that. See, yeah, this is what is storage.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, I mean, okay, so maybe we need to take it back to how this collaboration came about between the two of us. So there's a publisher in the UK, Huelle, that sponsors the contest, the translation competition. They sponsor a prize for young emerging translators. And the year that they dedicated their prize to Polish literature, Antonia was on the jury and selected a text, an original Polish text that was by a person who was also under 35 then, and that was Jacek.
Yeah.
And I was just about to turn 36, and so I just managed to submit that translation and still be counted as a young translator. And yeah, I guess the rest is history. But while I was working on this translation, I was not able to contact the author.
Does
And
it
ask
change
any
anything
questions.
after getting to know each other?
Yes, there are a few questions that I would have asked you. For example, why do you use double negations in your sentences so often? Can I can I be a little bit more creative how I translate? So
Oh, okay. The answer would be, of course, you can. I
Yeah.
would not interfere with that anyway. I mean, I never do that. And as a translator myself, I never ask any questions to the writers. I think that the translators, they know the job. They don't need to be treated that way. They don't need any special assistant. They don't need guidance.
Oh, yes, they do.
Do whatever you want. I mean, translating is, I guess, so making decisions, sometimes hard ones. And if it's your decision, you're the one that is responsible for that.
But it's exactly as Anna said, it's about catching the tone. And I think that sometimes the text, you're not sure if, especially when you haven't read a writer's oeuvre, right? Like you have this one short story and you don't know, like, was he having a bad day? Is that double negatives? Or is it something he really believes in?
He does, he
Not
does.
said.
He does.
You
but-
don't not believe in them.
You do not disbelieve either.
But you know, the point is that I think that the writer is not greatest expert on his work in general. I mean, there are many different people you may ask about those negatives, not the author.
For sure, but getting that extra information, like, oh, he even talks like that on the phone. I will be able to make an informed decision.
Okay, but you know, maybe the guy in the story talks like that. He's not me. I mean, in the 90s, I was like 10-year-old. I didn't have all those occasions that people about 25 to 30 like the narrator had. So this is not about me. So it's not my way of thinking. It's not my way of speaking. It's somebody else's. So yours is as good as mine. Your opinion on the text is as good as mine, and maybe even better.
What do you think?
That's very positive. Teacher, ask nice questions, take more decisions, take executive action.
Yeah, I do that. But what you said about the context, about I think that uh, the translator's job is not only to find the linguistic equivalent of the phrase, the sentence, words from one language to another, but also to somehow explain the cultural context, right? In Polish, the verb tłumaczyć means both to translate and to explain. And I guess there is some intuition into that. That a good translator is someone that works not only with sentences being written there, but with all the context. And probably he may know the context better than the author himself, which who sometimes works outside of that.
Or may know how to translate the gap, or how to preempt the gap between the home audience and the foreign language audience. Yeah.
So moving on, thank you very much. I just want to say why I put this story into this anthology and what was special for me about this story, which I originally chose when I was judging that composition. And as I said, it's about surviving the Holocaust, because there's the main narrator who you've heard going on about the era, the early 90s, when all these new possibilities were being explored. He's working in a sort of rather hopeless office that calls itself a travel agency. It's next door to an equally hopeless thing that calls itself a tattoo parlour or something like that. But although no one ever seems to come in to have a tattoo, it's some sort of money laundering. But then a man comes in to ask if he can have a tattoo removed. And you can guess what kind of a tattoo this older man had. So it's very poignant. And I like the way it talked about, in this under the radar way, of talking about surviving the Holocaust, but also confronting this strange new era when everything's so totally different. And there's all these wheeler-dealer types trying to take advantage of the new situation. I just thought that is such a clever illustration of certain aspects of what's happened in Poland in the last, well, in a 50-year period. And I think that's fascinating. So, I think it's a wonderful story. So, thank you. So, unfortunately, the other author who we had invited to take part in this event had a sudden family crisis, so she's not here with us. But
I'm afraid I'm going to have to how on earth does anyone represent Dorota Masłowska? Anyone who's ever met or seen Dorota performing, she is also a singer, as well as a writer, will know that she is a totally impossible act to follow or to stand in for. But she is very well known in Poland as she's now in her 40s, but she was known as the wild child of Polish literature, a kind of wunderkind, which whatever cliched phrase you wish to apply, a rebel kid, there you are. Well, when she was 19, she won the country's top literary award for a novel written in a sort of hip-hop style verse. And she's incredibly clever with language. She's someone who is absolutely ingenious at using language to her own purposes, and very modern language and very modern styles like rap or hip hop, which she can use within her texts. And she also writes extremely sharp critiques of society. And she is quite unlike any other writer. And she really did shake everything up when she came on the scene. And she's continued in the same vein. So when I was compiling this book, I had originally a long list of all sorts of authors who I thought ought to be in the book, but obviously I had to chip it down. I couldn't have everything. And as I said, I was sort of aiming for about 40, and I wanted to have women writers in there and try and get some sort of gender balance in it. So she was on my list, but I wasn't aware of her ever having written any short stories. So I looked through all her work. I couldn't find anything. So I wrote to her. She happens to be a friend. So I said, Dorothy, have you got any short stories? I'd love to include you in this book because you're just not like anybody else and you need to be represented here. And she wrote back and said, well, I'm terribly sorry. I haven't written any short stories. I don't really write them. And very early on, I wrote a couple, but they're rubbish kind of thing. So I thought, well, that's a pity because she is such an unusual author. And then she was away on a writer's residency in Switzerland. I wish she was here to tell the story because she would tell it a lot better than I will. But I will do my best. And she was staying in a place that used to be a convent, and it was some way out of the nearest town. So she felt quite isolated in this sort of strange monastic atmosphere of this building. And she was supposed to be working on a novel, but she didn't really have anyone to talk to there. There wasn't anyone she knew. I don't think there were any other Polish speakers. I mean, she speaks very, very good English, so she can communicate perfectly well. But I think she was feeling a bit isolated in this place, a bit cut off from her usual terrain. So a few weeks later, I suddenly got an email saying, Antonia, it's not too late, is it? I've written you a story. Wow, how often does that happen? So I read the story. It was fractionally too late, but I thought there's no way I'm not going to include this. And I translated it, and my editor loved it too. So it was all ready to roll. And it was very exciting that she'd felt inspired by this idea of writing a short story in this context where she was feeling a bit unsure of what she was doing and a bit cut off. And then I think we'd already gone into the editing when she eventually developed that story into an entire novel. And it's called Magiczna Rana, which her regular translator has translated as Wonder Wound, which is rather nice, the magic wound, literally. And so I would have got him to translate it, but I'd run out of commissioning money. So my apologies to Benjamin Paloff, who's her regular translator. But because it had been made into the first part of a novel, which is actually a set of stories which are very, very loosely linked. You have to read very closely to see the links between the stories. But in fact, the different narrators of the stories connect. But it's quite cryptic. It's quite a puzzle, this book. If you read Polish, I highly recommend it as an interesting literary puzzle. So she, of course, it went through editing in Polish and she rewrote it quite a lot. So guess what? I had to translate it again at the last minute because it had changed quite a lot. But we're going to read you a little bit in Polish and a little bit in English. So Magda Kleszczewska, who's from the Adam Mickiewicz Institute, who is our wonderful organizer of this event, has very kindly offered to read in Polish for us. And this is how many Polish speakers do we have in the room? Oh, lots and lots. So, but this is a story. It's a monologue. It's from the point of view of a boy who is, I suppose, he's a teenager, but he's perhaps a little bit neurodiverse. He's sort of treated as if he's not quite the full shilling, poor child, and he's growing up in a rather dysfunctional family. So. Magda, would you please?
Ona umie gotować. A jedynie bym powiedział, że to są wędliny zazwyczaj niezbyt dobre i czasem po ugotowaniu chować po prostu do lodówki i zamawiamy pizzę z trikolowi. A gluten kiluje komórki naszych ciał, rozwala nasze żołądki, tarczyce i mózgi. Choć podobno i tak jest to niebo a ziemia względem tego, jak niedobre i niezdrowe jest jedzenie na wyspach. Może przez to wujek Damian zaginął. Nie od tego, mówi mama. A od czego? Nie od tego, bo było jedzenie niedobre. To od czego? Bo miał różne problemy. Jakie? Różne, tak? Mówiąc to, mama oczy stały się nieobecne. Jakby zobaczyła gdzieś głęboko w sobie te problemy. A w tle te wyspy dalekie i straszne, targane huraganem, pełne tonących spiskiem szczurów, wyrywanych z korzeniami kolczastych, czarnych palm i mokrych, połamanych parasoli. Niepoliczalne i wrogie. Zaraz się zorientowała, że ja też wtedy tam patrzę i szybko zniszczyła ten obraz, ażebym go nie zobaczył. Ale sama chyba ciągle gdzieś go widzi. Bo jak zadzwonili z konsulatu, że wyłowili ciało i ktoś z rodziny musi przylecieć na pokazanie zwłok, to podobno babcia dostała głupiego Jasia i biegała po całym mieszkaniu, jakby chciała złapać piłkę, którą rzuca między sobą nad jej głową 1000 wściekłych, pijanych, czerwonych brytoni. Nie było z nią w ogóle gadki. Trzeba było zadzwonić po pogotowie i w końcu mama musiała lecieć na wyspę sama, bo ten drugi jej brat, który żyje, nie mógł zwolnić się z pracy. A ja musiałem zostać i siedzieć ciągle z łysą i oglądać wiele odcinków pod rząd serialu Piaści. Gdzie naprawdę prawie nic się nie działo, tylko piaści przebrani w koronę i różne szaty stali w komnacie i coś do siebie ciągle gadali, podczas gdy babcia dostała podobno bardzo dobre tabletki i niczym się już nie przejmowała. Skończyło się to źle, ale mama mówi, że sama się prosiła o nieszczęście, skoro trzyma byle gdzie zapałki, a sama sobie poszła spać.
So this boy who's telling the story, he's talking about his mother, and she's worried that it's gluten that makes him behave rather oddly. And he had an uncle who went off to the Isles, in other words, the British Isles, and has come to a sticky end there. So this is something he's interested in. She does know how to cook. All I can say is that things she cooks aren't always very good. So sometimes she makes something, then just shoves it in the fridge, and we order a tricolore pizza. Then the gluten trashes our body cells, destroys our stomachs, thyroid glands, and brains. Though I'm told that even so, it's paradise compared with how bad and unhealthy the food is in the British Isles. Maybe that's what Uncle Camille died of. Not because of that, says Mum. So what did he die of? Not because the food was bad. Then what of? Because he had some problems. Like what? Various. As she says this, Mum's eyes become absent, as if somewhere deep inside she could see those problems. And in the background, those aisles, distant and dreadful, hurricane-tossed, full of rats drowning with a squeal, thorny black palm trees, torn out by the roots, and wet, broken parasols, innumerable and hostile. At once she realised that I was looking over there too, and she quickly destroyed the image so I wouldn't see it. But she seems to go on seeing it somewhere inside, because when they called from the consulate to say they'd fished out the body and someone from the family had to fly there to identify it, apparently Gran went doolally and ran around the flat as if trying to catch a ball as 1,000 angry, drunken red Brits threw it to each other over her head. There was no talking to her. They had to call an ambulance. And finally, Mum had to fly to the Isles on her own because her other brother, the one who's alive, couldn't get time off work. And I had to stay behind and sit with Baldy, my gran, watching episode after episode of The Piasts, when just about nothing ever happened, except those Piasts, all dressed up in crowns and robes and things, stood in a chamber blathering at each other. Meanwhile, Gran got some very good pills and wasn't bothered about anything after that. Again, as Anna and Tuesday both said, it's about catching the tone of the text, because I wish I knew how to render Dorota's way of using English. For instance, there's a funny thing in this text. She says about the gluten that it kiluje the cells of your body, and that a kiluje is of course a Polish way of using the word kill and just turning it into a Polish verb that doesn't exist. So I said to her, oh God, she said, oh well, Polish is littered with all these borrowed English words that are simply put into a Polish grammatical form. So I put trashkies, thinking that that's kind of how that might be said in English. But it's sad that I've lost inevitably the wonderful distortion of English that goes on. So, where are we? Are we at the point where people can ask questions?
I just want to. Can I just share an anecdote? Just because of the kiluje. So I was born in Poland. I was 3 when my family left the country. So I speak Polish without an accent, as you noticed, but I speak the way my mother spoke in 1984 when we left. Yeah, I'm a living museum. I'm a fossil. In linguistics, it's called linguistic fossilization. So I was having drinks with a couple of people in Krakow. Actually, we were there together, and this guy, Polish guy, asked me, "So, what's your story? Like, you don't seem like." And I was like, "Oh, well, you guess." And he was like, "Okay, let's keep talking." And after a while, he was like, "I know. You're not using any English words. That's what makes my Polish different, because I'm pre-transition, pre-transformation, pre-English. I have pure Polish. I don't speak like Dorota Masłowska.
Polish RP then.
Or IIP Polish.